Hey guys, I'm Josh, back with Take a Leap. We're out here searching far and wide for the worst dating stories.
Yeah, so I friend-zoned this guy the night before, and then he asked me on a date to go to a trampoline park, and I broke my nose.
I thought jumping higher would impress her, but
It should.
it would have, but my knee went into my chin and cut it open pretty bad. I had to go to the hospital.
She looks at me dead in the face and says, "I'm not in college, I'm in high school."
We get to the trailhead, and he pulls up in his car with 3 other girls, and they're just like all over him. And then they just walk down without me, and I was left at the top of the hill.
Next thing you know, bang, my freaking teeth crack. My front tooth cracks.
Hey guys, welcome back to Take a Leap. I'm Leah, and co-hosting with me today is Josh.
Hi guys. Today we are here with Mallory Everton and Diana Brown from the Soloists podcast. Thanks guys for joining us.
Hello, thank you for having us.
We'll just jump right into it because, like I said, we were super interested in this idea of like the Soloist podcast, which for our listeners who don't know, it's a podcast that you guys started talking about your experience being single in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and I guess in Christianity in general as well. So where did this idea come from?
Well, I began working with Faith Matters, and just in getting to know them, I was chatting a lot with the founders and just about, what faith looks like in my life and this big question of marital status, because the life that church tends to imagine is so often family life. And that wasn't happening in my life. It leads to lots of questions about like, what have I done wrong? Do I belong here? Am I totally off the path that God meant for me to take? And lots of personal questions about my own value and worth and my own path. And then also just, sort of a crisis of meaning about whether I could see myself in the church and whether this was like a place that was really helping me to live the life that I wanted to live. And so anyway, in conversations with Faith Matters, they actually put me in touch with Mallory, and they were like, she's brilliant on these topics, and she sure was. And I think we just wanted to shed light on precisely the sort of crisis of meaning that happens when your family life doesn't comport with the sort of fairy tale picture that's sometimes presented in our church.
Yeah, and I think we had a sense too that the sort of ideas that we were both developing in this kind of tricky space that could feel a little bit like living in a constant state of hope and grief, almost like grieving the life that you thought you would have, that you hope that you still have, that you don't have. It's so painful that there are so many people, like over 50% of the church is single, who are also full of ideas and tools and brilliance on this topic as well. And we were hoping to build more community in that space where we could share all of our ideas and the different beautiful epiphanies we were coming upon. That was my favorite thing about my first conversation with Diana. It was like, this feels like I'm talking with someone who's lived the same life as me, but like in a parallel universe. So like she's learning all these different things that are super useful to me and had language that I didn't have. And it was very, very helpful to me immediately. And we were hoping to be able to do the same for other people.
Yeah. I love the explanation you gave of grief and hope kind of coexisting. I think that's so interesting. And I love that you started something and did something with that. Instead of just sitting with those big feelings, you reached out to say, is there anyone else feeling this way? Is there a community here that I can tap into? That's awesome.
I have a friend who a couple weeks ago, she was quoting another friend, but she said that if you're feeling alone or adrift, go where the beautiful people are, and if there's nowhere for them to go, then build the place where the beautiful people can come. And I think that there's something to like, you have the most to offer in the places where you suffered the most.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as I was going through, my own grief around this, I feel like around the time I turned 30, it was just a big mourning thing of like, okay, the life that I hoped I would have, like, quite frankly, if 10 years ago you told me I wouldn't be married by that age, I would have wanted to die.
Yeah.
Like, that's so sad. But seriously, we like set ourselves up for so much grief around this question. I think one of the things that I'm just so thankful that I get to do this work in a faith context is because what I found was not that, my religion sold me a bill of lies or just set me up for failure. I think the fairy tale doesn't serve people. I think it doesn't even serve people who do look like they're doing that on the surface. So there's a lot to work on culturally in terms of what we focus on in the church. But I did feel like I had those spiritual tools to rebirth myself. Like I was taught the gospel of Jesus Christ in our church. And I did learn, when you want to turn inwards with grief and pain, how to turn outwards and to try to consecrate your experiences and your pain for other people. And I'm so grateful. I feel so lucky, actually. It's been very good for my own sort of discomfort and pain on this question to get to think about how it can be consecrated to help others. And I think this podcast is like a platform to do that.
I love that idea of being reborn, Diana. I've never heard you say that before, and I think that's gorgeous. Because I relate to the feeling, the way that I've always thought about it, because I've had, I don't even know, what is the term for faith crisis these days? Like what are the kids calling it these days? Faith transition,
Right.
faith transformation, because crisis can sound like a real scary word, but I've been through many of those like faith crunching, is this going to work out moments, and some big twists and turns in my faith. At each of those junctures, I always had a sense that I could either back out now or I could go deeper and see what happened. Like I could go even deeper and ask the questions and see who's tried to answer them and see how the people who seemed to struggle, where they landed and how they got to some distant shore that I couldn't recognize from where I was. And so I hear what you're saying in that birthing process, like becoming a new creature.
Yeah, I love that.
I feel like a lot of young people are going through, faith crises / crunches / whatever we want to call it these days. Is there a place that you would turn to when you have like a moment of questioning or a moment of, I need some spiritual growth? Like, what's your fallback when you get to those points?
I think that what's been very helpful for me is sometimes, and I mean, it's almost like you need to give your brain a break from the same sources sometimes. Like it's been helpful for me to read other Christian authors. It was helpful for me to watch The Chosen, to see other ways to connect to Christ, to turn to art and music. I got really into gospel music for a while because I was having a really hard time. I was very anxious at one point and really, really struggling to just function. And I started really struggling even with listening to spiritual music because it just wasn't upbeat enough. I needed more joy in Christ. I needed to feel like it was a celebration. I needed like something that would like lift my spirits and be about God. And so sometimes I just think we need a medium change. Sometimes you just need like something to jolt you out of the habitual mental cycle that you're in. And so that whether that's other Mormon authors or other religious texts or something that's completely not religious at all, but makes you feel connected to yourself or to something godly,
Yeah. I think one thing that I've learned from Mallory that she always says, like, whenever there's something that makes us uncomfortable, that's like precisely the place that we need to go. If there's some question on this issue that we're like, are we allowed to talk about? Like, is that too far? She's like, we need to go there. That's where the nugget will be. That's where the insight will be. One of the scriptures that was just really foundational in my testimony growing up and that I still think about all the time is the revelation given to Joseph Smith in Liberty Jail when he's like super suffering. And Jesus is just like, you can't go lower than me. Like, I've been through everything. I'm here with you. This will be for your good. And I think that helped me to realize that no matter how dark and uncomfortable life gets, I'm always with God in that. And there's no space where this is like actually separate from a life of holiness. And that the question is simply like how to receive it as such. And that's a challenging thing to do. But I think just not being afraid of discomfort and sometimes even leaning into it. I find that like journaling about precisely the things that I'm like confused about is such a helpful way for me to get insight into it and even like see the new truth that I'm being invited to consider.
Something that you said a little while ago, Diana, was that you need to think about where you look to find worth. And I think that's what both of you were kind of just talking about. Like if we put our worth in a relationship or our grades, maybe, because we're students, you're kind of setting yourself up to be disappointed. But if you turn to religion, whichever institution that may be, there's a greater possibility that you'll find joy and that joy will be lasting.
Almost every success structure that we set up is inherently elitist and or judgmental. And it either creates shame for you or creates judgment of others. And so there is this thing that when we enter into like judging ourselves based on grades and deciding how valuable we are based on grades. That sets us up to think that people who aren't getting good grades aren't valuable. And so we might feel like we're benefiting from that kind of framework when we're getting good grades, but we really, really feel it when we're not getting good grades. It makes us feel more compassion for other people who aren't getting good grades. I don't know if you can sense the symbol here, but like it's very similar with like the idea that a successful person, a worthwhile person gets a partner, and somebody who isn't a successful or worthwhile person doesn't, and that must mean there's something wrong with them. But the longer that you're in that space, the more I think you begin to learn, like, I don't think this is about who's worthwhile and who's not. And I feel like I've almost felt the urge to repent because I had so much unpacking to do, and I still continue to unpack the inherent shame that I carried around for being alone. Because it meant that I was also judging others who were alone. It also meant that I was seeing them as less valuable. And the more that I've been able to release that, the more that nobody's experience scares me, including my own, which is very freeing. And it also means that I get to be with people wherever they are. And I get to be with myself wherever I am too.
It's really lovely, Mallory.
Yeah, that is awesome. I feel like in my life that happens to me all the time where God's not going to let my life change until I'm okay with where I'm at. Like no matter what. And I think it's so funny. I'm like, okay, like I just want this. I just really want this. And like I want this change. And he always finds a way to teach me to be okay with the present and to be okay that I have value even if I'm not where I think I should be.
Have you ever seen Groundhog Day?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the movie I always think of when you talk about presence. He literally has to learn how to completely embrace the same day. I remember actually that was really useful to me my freshman year at BYU. I was having such a hard time that first semester. And I remember thinking like, I'm just going to pretend like this is Groundhog Day. And that like BYU is Groundhog Day. But I had like a feeling like I can figure out how to embrace this day, you know? And what if my situation never changed? I bet that there's a way I can look at it differently, or that I can like spot more people I can help, or that I can like eat food that makes me happy at the very least, or something, you know, whatever it is that brings you joy.
Yeah, for sure. So we've talked a little bit about this community that you've tried to tap into and reach out to. And I know your podcast is newer, but do you have any responses that you've received to your podcast?
Yeah. I mean, the world has enough podcasts, right? If you're starting a podcast in 2024, you got to be sure you have a good audience for it. You're like finding a new niche. But this really just is kind of low-hanging fruit because, quite frankly, this is not just like some oddballs here and there. Like our generation is not getting married at the rates and at the ages, and even not even staying married like previous generations have. This world is shifting that way, even in our church community. It's like I just think that people end up finding themselves in all sorts of situations they never thought they would when they find that their dating market, their dating pool, their options that way are sometimes at odds with what's expected of them religiously, or just they end up being single for a long time and feeling like so unseen and so worthless, frankly, in our community that they end up just being like, there's no place for me. We all grew up with the same hymns. We all grew up singing families can be together forever and longing for this like temple marriage. We're sort of shaped to want that kind of life. And then whether, you know, we're obviously speaking to people who are still trying to find their place in the church, but also we hope that it'll be broader than that. And I feel like, I mean, we've received emails from like people all over the spectrum, including some non-members too. Just today, I got an email from a woman who's in her late 30s and she's dating a Muslim man. And we recently, you know, mentioned a scenario like that in one of our podcasts. Like, what do you do if you've got two faiths and how do you merge them? And she was like, I've just never heard this addressed in any kind of church setting. And she's like, and I'm in my late 30s. Like, I only have so many years left if I want to have kids. Like, this feels really urgent, right? And another woman, but similar situation in her late 30s. She was like, hey, I've got this great guy, but he's not okay with just keeping it a kissing. And what do I do about this? Like, I really want to get married. I don't have that much longer left. Like, what am I supposed to do? Again, we don't have all the answers, but just bringing light to these stories and to these questions. We're finding a lot of people who just find themselves in all sorts of situations, really finding solace in the community.
I love that. I have kind of an addiction to reading comments, so in preparation for
Oh.
this interview, I went through all of your Instagram comments basically, and I was like, oh yeah, like everyone is loving
Damn.
us. And what was really interesting to me were there were comments where it was like, oh yeah, like I'm a mom, and this helped me really like understand my son better, and that like he's in a good place, or like things like that. So at the risk of eliciting a response filled with like cuss words that we'll have to edit out, what would your message be to married people who are talking to their single friends or family about relationships? What would you say to them?
I think that's such a good question. I think the main thing that I would encourage married people to do is to just push on any fear or judgment or worry that they're feeling about the person, and really ask where that's coming from. Because what I feel like your single friends and family members often need is the feeling that you believe in them and that you think they're great and that you're not blaming them for their circumstance. I think this, like, you're being too picky, you need to settle. Have you thought about this or that? There might be a place for that. Like, I can't make a call for you in your specific situation. Like, definitely pray about it or consult who you like to consult when you're making a decision. But I think that we should be suspicious of our desire to lump single people into a category of problems to be solved. And I think that we can be better friends and neighbors and siblings and parents than that.
I completely agree. People do not want to be treated like problems. And so often they are. They just need the message of like, you are whole and you are okay. I know a lot of people are freaking out about marriage rates dropping and stuff like that. I think we might just be a generation that's just taking more time to do things. And so not freaking out, being chill, being patient, and just remembering that what we really need is just good old fashioned love and wholeness and believing in each other. And I think that's really what people need. And if and when the romance marriage question comes into their life, let's just help people feel whole and ready and capable of love to receive that. And there's so much stress and grief and pain and self-loathing around this question that can sometimes just get in the way of that.
I think that if you're struggling to figure out what to ask in lieu of like, you dating anybody, or how's it going with so-and-so? Last time I heard you had a pretty bad breakup, but did you get back together? It's like, can be kind of rough territory if you don't know what else to ask, or if you just feel like your life is so different from theirs that it's like, oh, I'm raising these babies and they don't have babies. What do I ask them about? I think we all struggle knowing what to ask, but I think asking them what they really care about right now, like what's driving them crazy, what are they looking forward to this year, what have they got planned, like what's lighting them up right now. We're all wired for purpose, and figuring out what is driving this person and how to be in it with them, whatever battle they're fighting right now, is something we can all do no matter our circumstance, even if they look pretty unfamiliar.
Yeah, there are so many other things you can talk about with someone, make them feel like they're important and whole and have other talents. You don't only need to talk about dating all the time.
Or if you do want to talk about dating, because dating is frankly, I think we like to talk about it, but do it in a way where it's not like,
it's interesting.
We like the tea.
Be open for the tea and be open for the person to like have whatever kind of response they need. So for example, I sometimes feel my parents are fantastic. And so this is not in any way wanting to like, criticize them. But sometimes if I'm like, I went on this date with a guy, if something doesn't go well, I can just sometimes sense a stiffening, and they're like, Diana, you're being too picky. You should just go for it. You should like, you're not allowed to not like somebody at this age. You're not allowed to like not be into it. And that's hard, right? That makes me feel like I can't really share what I'm experiencing, what I'm going through, and be honest about my thought processes. That's not a very, fun environment for a single person to discuss dating. But if you're really just there to experience life with them, that's fantastic.
I think that's brilliant. That's such a good point.
Yeah, for sure.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you guys want to get to?
I think allowing yourself to let go of the idea of a happily ever after and try and adapt some different type of story in your life, a story that allows you to change and ebb and flow and go through highs and lows, and doesn't basically measure you as a failure unless you get a happily ever after, or you get a certain type of house or a certain type of family or a certain type of career situation. That isn't helping us. It isn't helping us. So I think just allowing yourself to picture your life as more dynamic than that, because nobody's life just gets to a fairy tale and then coasts. It's actually really unfortunate when you realize that doesn't kick in your marriage either.
I completely agree. Everyone will have reason to think that their life is like irreparably tragic at times, whether you get married or whatever age. And I just think, you know, in those moments to just remember, no, this is it. This is real life, and this is what I'm here for. And try to find the beauty. And I love the word dynamic. Enjoy the dynamic of your own life and the idiosyncrasies and the, you know, the uniqueness of the way that God is revealing himself to you in your life, and just enjoy that, and don't be afraid if it diverges from the norm.
What a dynamic way to end. That was amazing. My religion professor, every time we leave, says, "You are loved." And I feel like that's how we should end this episode. Just, you are loved. All
You
listeners,
are loved.
we love you.
We're all loved. Doesn't it feel good?
A big thanks to Diana Brown and Mallory Everton for joining us today. They are amazing examples of faith, and their podcast is so important. Be sure to check it out. It's called The Soloists. Take a Leap is a production of BYU Radio. Tonight, we encourage you to go on a date with yourself. Treat yourself to some ice cream and a rom-com. And, of course, remember the immortal words of Jessica Day. I'm single and I'm sufficient. We love you. See you next time. Mic drop.